At our workshop on Tuesday, we talked about how assignment guidelines do two fundamental things. One, they communicate your professor's expectations for writing assignments. Two, they can act as a roadmap for you through the reading and writing process. By analyzing the guidelines, you may learn what questions you should answer in your paper and use those guidelines to guide you through your reading, note-taking, and writing. Yesterday, we talked about reading, note-taking, and paraphrasing. On this slide, you'll see a recap of 4 important strategies for note-taking. While you'll develop your own note-taking system, we strongly suggest incorporating these strategies. So I'll read them off the slide. Use your own words when you take notes. That's paraphrasing. If you don't understand an important idea, look for background information. Build up your base of knowledge. Use the language of your assignment question to help you reword or reframe the ideas you're reading about. And after paraphrasing, check back with the original source to make sure you've used your own words to re-express the idea. And yesterday we talked about the fact that if any of the paraphrases from your notes land in your paper, you really need to check that you've completely reworded, and that means changing the words and the sentence structure. We want to focus now on writing the draft. Note-taking already involves a lot of writing, but now we're talking about writing up your actual paper. Writers feel differently about creating detailed outlines before they write. When I talk to the writing tutors about this, some people talk about making detailed plans, and some people talk about just launching straight into their writing. You may not be the kind of writer who wants to create a detailed plan. You might like to see where the writing process takes you. That said, it's a good idea to have even a rough outline in your mind. You should know your basic answer to the assignment question and your main points that you'll use to support your answer. So before you write, know answer to the assignment question, what are the main points I need to cover, or the reasons for my answer. If you can clearly and directly state your basic answer to the assignment question in 2 to 3 sentences in your own words, and if you can clearly and directly state the supporting points or reasons in your own words, you've got your outline. You'll use the information from sources to back up those points. One last quick point. If you hear professors say, your paper needs a thesis statement, really what that is a statement of your main answer to the assignment question or the argument for your paper. It's a statement in 1 to 2 sentences. Your basic answer or the thesis statement should be included in your introduction so your reader knows exactly what point in your paper you will make and the main points you'll use to support it. So in these workshops so far, we've been focused on really the process of writing, from understanding assignment instruction to planning the draft. I'm going to pass things over to Loie now. She'll take you through aspects of academic writing from another angle.
Thanks, Kathy. So I'm just going to present a simple way of breaking down essentially like the basis of what you're trying to accomplish when you're writing your paper at the U of M. It can be helpful to think about things in more than one way, and this is a way that has been helpful for a lot of students. So the way that we are conceptualizing it here is as 4 keys. So there are many different components to writing an academic paper, but we've kind of narrowed it down to 4 specific points to really keep in mind, almost like a checklist when you are approaching your written assignment. And we do specify that this is within a Canadian context because this approach, these 4 keys, are not universal ideas. These are sort of the ideas that underlie the expectations around writing in a Canadian or a Western academic context, which is what the U of M is based on. So for some of you, writing in a Canadian context, this might be the first time that you're doing it. So some of these principles will be a bit different from how you've approached your writing in the past. For others that have written papers in this kind of environment, you'll notice some things that sound familiar to you, but you might not have thought about them and broken them down in this way in terms of how you're integrating the ideas of others to support your own voice. So the first kind of key when you're approaching writing in this context is that writers need to present their ideas through arguments. So as a writer, you're expected to express an informed opinion with the goal of convincing whoever is reading what you've written. So you can move on to the next slide, Kathy. So the second thing is, once you have made clear your argument or your point, you have to support it with evidence. So this evidence can be a range of different kinds of sources. So it can be from journal articles, it can be from books, from websites, lecture notes, podcasts, YouTube videos. Depending on your field, the type of evidence that you use will be different. But the important key here is that once you have made your argument, you really need to support it in some way. So the third key following that is analysis. So you have made your argument, you are supporting it with the evidence, but it's not enough just to present that evidence. You have to analyze it. So you have to explain why you're including it. Does it support your argument? Do you disagree with it, and that's why you're including it? Is it sort of in combination with a number of other authors that are also in agreement on a particular point that is important for the argument that you're making? So all of these things really fit together, and they build on one another. And then the fourth key that we'll move on to here is writers are contributing their own ideas, and then they're crediting the works of others. Nothing that we do in academics is ever within a vacuum. We're always building on the work of others. And so this is really where citing and referencing comes in. And you may have been required to do some citing and referencing in your previous educational experience. The expectations might have been different than they are at the U of M. In fact, it probably will have been a little bit different. But the principle is really the same, which is showing respect to the work of others that we're building on. So if we go to the next slide, we can see sort of a summary of these four keys. So keeping these in mind will help you ensure that you have checked off all of the sort of fundamental requirements of a piece of written work. So asking yourself when you're going through your assignment, have you made a clear argument? Is it obvious to the reader what point you're trying to make? In addition to making that point, have you drawn on other work to support that argument? So have you integrated information from a book, from a journal article, etc.? Once you've included that evidence, what have you done with it further? Have you just sort of put it in your paper and then made your conclusion? Or have you put it in your paper and explained, contextualized it, how it supports or doesn't support what you're trying, what point you're trying to make? And then lastly, once you've sort of integrated all of these different components, have you ensured that it's clear to the reader where you've gotten that information from, and where your sort of contribution ends and somebody else's begins. So this can be used as a tool for thinking about your assignment. So we'll move on to the next slide now. And this is really where we're putting these concepts into practice when we're thinking about our draft. So as you're writing your draft and you're putting in your own thoughts and integrating information from other sources, it's really important to make a distinction between your own voice, your own contribution, and that of others. So this is where a lot of students have a learning curve when they first start writing at the university level, because you are having to make your own arguments, but you also have to draw on a lot of other information, and often complex information, in a way that you might not have done before. So in a Western academic context, so Canadian context, ideas and words are owned. And so this is really part of the reason that it's so important to make this distinction between where ideas are coming from and how they're distinct from your own. So in your writing, you need to be supporting your arguments with evidence. In addition to that, you have to make clear which ideas or which analyses are your own, and then which words and ideas are coming from others. So you might be wondering how you do this, and I think some of you probably already have some ideas that it has something to do with citing and referencing, and I know that that was a concern that was brought up in the poll. One of the reasons we did that poll is we really wanted to know where you're coming from and what your concerns are. So that's a pretty common one. So don't worry, we're going to talk about that right now. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So we need to give credit to our sources, and there are two essential steps to doing this. So the first step is an in-text citation. So this citation shows where the specific ideas in your paper are coming from. So every time an idea from a source is in your paper, it has to have a citation that accompanies it. You need to put a citation whether you are quoting, so taking information word for word from the original source, or whether you're just paraphrasing, so putting that idea in your own words, which is what you're doing a lot of the time at the university level. You need to have a citation in both situations. And you have to use the same citation style consistently throughout your assignment. So the example we have here is a paraphrase, and the citation is in APA style. So that stands for American Psychological Association. That is a style that is used quite widely across the university, but there are other citation styles that you might use as well, like MLA or Chicago. But for the purpose of this example, we have an APA example. So you can see in this citation, or actually in this paraphrase, we have more interesting still is the finding that between 1971 and 1996, there was a 24% increase in the number of professions having a post-secondary degree. So we can see this person who has put this information into their paper has put it into their own words. It's not in quotes, so we know that it's not word for word from the source, but the idea or the information is from the source. What is the source? The source is Bechstein and Vinogradov, the two authors, and the work that they published in 2003. This information was on page 5. So this is the first step that we need when we're really trying to make clear where the information is coming from in the body of our paper. So we'll move on to the next slide here. And the second piece that has to go with the in-text citation is a reference entry. So in my experience in working with students, most students have to some degree, they have some familiarity with a reference list. They know that it usually goes at the end of a paper, that you are including what you have sort of consulted or used to research your assignment. But it actually includes the information that you need specifically to find that source. So it includes more than a link or more than an author name, whereas the in-text citation just includes the author name, the year, and the page. So this information goes at the end of your paper. And it really does give that detailed enough information that you could take this, to the library or to a librarian, and they could help you find it, or you could find it on your own. So those are the two steps that are really fundamental to distinguishing your ideas from someone else's ideas or analysis in a paper. But then there's an additional tool that we use in writing called a signal phrase. So a signal phrase is a verb, so an action word that we use to introduce evidence from a source. And it really just helps us to further clarify where our words end, or our analysis or ideas end, and where another author's words, ideas, analysis are coming in. Because at the university level you are integrating so much information, it's just another strategy to make it very clear to your writer that you're bringing in additional evidence. So you can see the example here is from our previous example of a paraphrase from Bechstein and Vinogradov. But here at the beginning it says, Bechstein and Vinogradov concluded that this trend has emerged in Canada in a geographically uniform way and across all industries. So this Bechstein and Vinogradov concluded that is just signaling to the reader, okay, this information is coming from this source, in addition to the citation. So Kathy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that before we move on to the next part.
I think, Loie, that you really brought in the main elements of citing and referencing and being clear with your reader about where information comes from. I guess maybe I would just highlight that point, that this is really part of the communication between you as the writer of the paper and your reader, really being clear on, these are my ideas, and these are ideas that come from sources, and what are those sources? So the signal phrases are a great way of communicating to your reader that a piece that's upcoming comes from a source. But think of it as communicating clearly with your reader about which are your ideas, which are your analyses, and where are you pulling information from a source to sort of back up that analysis. I can imagine that there are quite coming up in the chat, but we're just going to hold off a little bit longer, and we're going to go into an activity that will hopefully help you see this. I think those examples that Loie showed on the slide were really clear, but let's look at how this is all put together in a sample paragraph. So we're going to do an activity now, putting all of this information together and seeing it modeled. In the paragraph that we're going to look at, we'll look at where the writer's voice comes through and where the writer draws on ideas from sources by paraphrasing or quoting. So this time when we look at this sample paragraph, you're in the seat of the reader. So the writer of this paragraph should be clearly signaling to you which ideas are their own or their own conclusions and which come from sources. So the sample paragraph that we'll look at was written in response to an assignment guideline about leadership. The guideline is on this slide. For those of you who attended on Tuesday, this guideline will look really familiar. I'll read the first part out so you have a sense of context for the next slide when we get to the paragraph. In his article, 7 Moral Challenges of Leadership, Nicholas Emler, 2019, see that APA citation tucked in there, even into the guideline. Emler discussed 7 challenges for leaders of public and private organizations and institutions. Using your own words, summarize the 7 challenges. Select 2 of the challenges that you believe are especially relevant for leaders in 2020. Using examples from our course readings, formulate an argument showing why these 2 challenges are significant for leaders today. So here's the paragraph. In this paragraph, the student is discussing one of the 2 challenges that she thinks is especially relevant for leaders in 2020. The particular challenge she's focusing on is the challenge to do good or correct injustices. This is a challenge that Emler brought up in his article, and this is one of the two that she picked as especially important. This is how the paragraph in her paper looks as a whole. Please don't try to read it. We'll look at it and analyze it in bite-sized chunks. So let's read through 4 chunks first, and then we're going to come back and sort of analyze them for what they're doing. So this first chunk of the student's paragraph. A moral challenge that is especially important for leaders today is the challenge of using a leadership position to make positive change, not just within the leader's organization, but in the larger society. Let's read the second chunk from the paragraph. Emler, 2019, suggests that one of the aims of a leader should be to identify and correct injustices and use the leadership position to do good. That's a quote, page 40. He notes that this is one of the most difficult challenges for leaders because doing good can sometimes run against the interests of the organization, for example, the interests of shareholders. Now the third chunk. Thorne, 2012, agrees that leaders have responsibilities that go beyond the success of their own organization and that they should work towards making the world a better place. She is interested in transformational leadership. And the last chunk that we're going to look at from this paragraph. While leaders are mainly focused on developing their own organizations, they should also be sensitive to how their decisions and the development of their organization are affecting others outside of the organization and use their influence to create a more caring society. So we're going to go back now to the very first chunk, and I'm going to run a poll. And the question is, what is the student writer doing in this chunk of text? Is she A, announcing what she's doing in the paragraph, or B, explaining her point using information from a source, or C, explaining the significance of an idea in her own words? This little chunk is the first part of her paragraph, just to give you context. I'm going to close the poll, and you'll be able to see which of the answers your fellow attendees chosen here. Okay, so we'll publish those poll results. We see that most people felt that the writer is explaining the significance of an idea in her own words. Now, some people thought she's announcing what she's doing in the paragraph, and a few thought she's explaining her point using information from a source. It's probably hard to see without looking at the whole paragraph and seeing this little chunk in the context of the whole thing. But here, what she's doing, because it comes first in the paragraph, we're kind of looking at these chunks in chronological order of how they fall in the paragraph. Here she is announcing, in response to the guideline, one of the two challenges she has chosen.
Kathy, you were breaking up for most of that explanation.
Okay, I will start that again. So it's hard to see without looking at the full paragraph and where this little chunk falls within that paragraph, exactly what she is doing. But we're looking at these chunks sort of in chronological order of where they fall in the paragraph. That's probably important for you to know. Here, what the writer is doing is actually she's announcing what she's doing in the paragraph. And here she's clearly linking back to the assignment guideline, telling the reader what one of the two moral challenges is chosen. So she's saying the moral challenge that she's chosen is to make positive change. Coral, is my audio any better?
It was better. It did just cut out right at the end there, those last few seconds.
Okay. So I'll just repeat this one more time. She is announcing to the reader, who really is the grader marker in this case, which are one of the challenges that she has chosen to write about in this paper, and that is the challenge for leaders of making positive change. Let's go to the next chunk. I'm going to run another poll, and let's see, what do you think she is doing in this? So remember, this chunk comes next in the paragraph. Okay, I'm going to close the poll, and you'll see in a little bit what your peers have chosen. Looks like there's a little bit more certainty about what she is doing. So the majority of people chose B. She's explaining her point using information from a source. So I'd like you to respond to this question in the chat. How did you know that she is using information from a source? And Coral, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you're seeing in answer to that question in the chat.
We're seeing the use of both the citation being used as well as specifically the signal phrase that introduces this section.
Yes, exactly. So notice how the writer begins this little chunk by stating the author's name, the author of the source that she's using, and that's, of course, Emler. She turns that into an APA citation by putting the date with the author's name. And notice how she has quotation marks around do good. Those are actual words from the Emler article, and so they need to be inside quotation marks. Great. You picked up on some of the signal phrases. Even that phrase, she notes that. So this writer is trying to be really clear that this information is mostly paraphrased, a little bit quoted from the source by Emler. Let's do another one. We'll run another poll. What is the student doing in this chunk of the paragraph? And I'll close the poll and we'll take a look at the results again. There's a little less certainty about this one. Most people said she's explaining her point using information from a source, but some felt, too, that she's explaining the significance of an idea. Chloe, do you want to weigh in on this one? Maybe Chloe.
Sorry, Kathy, I was having technical difficulties. Sorry, I might cut out. I think you should,
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, of course.
I'll go ahead. In this case, just like the previous example, the writer is doing B. She is explaining her point using information from a source. And notice again that clear signal phrase, Thorne agrees, that has actually been turned into an APA citation because it includes the date, but you'll learn about those details later. Don't worry too much about that now. But this chunk starts by referring back to an article by Thorne. And it starts by giving the reader that clear signal phrase, Thorne agrees that. And then look at the second sentence. The signaling continues that this information comes from a source. She is interested in transformational leadership. So what the student writer is doing here is summarizing ideas from Thorne that are relevant to the point she's making in her paper. Let's look at one more chunk from this paragraph. This comes right at the end of the paragraph. And I'll close the poll. You have, I think, a few more seconds to respond if you'd like. There's a lot more certainty about what she's doing in this chunk. Okay, let's see what you said. Almost everybody said C. She is explaining the significance of an idea in her own words. And again, I'll ask you to respond in the chat. How do you know she's doing that? What tells you that? And Coral, when things are coming up in chat, if you could share them with us.
The main thing that's getting pointed out so far is that there aren't any citations or evidence, but that it is bringing up more of an opinion, an argument here.
Right. This is
we also have a few that are going, well, she is the only one that hasn't been the answer yet.
Yes. And, we are leading you to this conclusion. You're absolutely right on that. Yeah, there are no signal phrases here. There are no citations. So the reader assumes that this comes from the student writer, that this is her statement of the significance and the relevance of those pieces of information that she chose from her readings. Chloe, would you like to add to that?
I don't think I have anything to add to this one before we get to the next slide here. Yeah. So here we can see here, I'll try and turn my camera back on. Having issues with my internet, so I hope that you can hear me okay. But so here we can kind of see a visual representation of how everything fits together. So the color coding is really helpful because we can see, along with the theme of this presentation or workshop, how we can integrate the information from another source, but then still make clear our own claims, and it all fits together. So you can see everything highlighted kind of in this purplish color here. At the very beginning and the end, we have the writer's claim. So kind of think of it as, the introduction and then the conclusion. So making clear the claim at the very beginning and then bringing it all together at the end. And then you see a whole lot of green in the middle. So a lot of, paraphrasing and a little bit of quoting in terms of that information from another source. So the writer's claim is introduced at the beginning, but then it's very heavily supported here with this information all in green. But where a lot of students find some challenges, especially when they're first starting, is they will have all of that information together, but they haven't yet built that skill for differentiating what is the writer's claim and what is the information from somewhere else. Because it might be obvious to you when you're putting together a paper, when you're researching and you're putting in information, it might be obvious to you, okay, well, clearly this isn't something that I know. I got this from somewhere else. But it's not necessarily obvious to your reader. So that's where those citations and those signal phrases come in. So you can see through the body of that paragraph that each sentence of information it's clearly associated with a citation, and then also matches the reference list. So the citation on its own, it helps us to see within the whole context of the paper where your sort of claim ends and the information that supports it begins. And then the reference at the end gives the reader the full information that they need to find that source if they wanted to go read it themselves. So one way that I like to think about this is kind of how, this is like a mini condensed essay, essentially. But you would sort of pull this apart and expand it for a regular-sized paper, but it would have all of these components throughout it. So it has the writer's claim and the argument that's made very clearly at the beginning. It has the conclusion that wraps everything up at the end, and then in between is the evidence that supports that claim. So hopefully that visual and this activities have answered some of your questions. There's a lot of questions that have come up in the chat, and there'll be more opportunity to ask more of those questions. But hopefully this gives you kind of a snapshot of how this all fits together.
I'm going to add one more idea to what Loie just talked about. So in these 3 academic writing workshops, we've talked a lot about the pre-writing, like what do you do before you begin to draft your paper, understanding the guidelines, reading, note-taking, a little bit about outlining. But I want to talk a little bit about revising your paper after you've written a draft. This color coding strategy can be really useful to you as the writer when you're looking at your paper before you hand it in. So you can take these highlighters, highlight your points, let's say in pink. So where does my voice come through? And really it should be coming through at the opening of every body paragraph, announcing to your reader, what is it that you want to say in this paragraph? What point do you want to make? Those should be your words. That is part of your argument. And then you can highlight in the middle of your paragraph, what's the information that I'm using from my sources to back up what I'm saying? Where am I drawing on authorities in the field to bring in their voice to support me? So there should be, in the middle of your paragraph, information that comes from sources. And alongside all that information, let's say you put that into green, you should have citations and signal phrases perhaps, but really you must have citations. So if you highlight those in yellow, if you're missing citations, make sure you go back and put those in and tell your reader what your sources are. And then at the end of each paragraph, you'll probably have back to your own voice where you are explaining the significance of that information that you've taken from your sources and how it supports the argument or the point you're trying to make in your paper. So you can use this same color coding scheme that you are building your argument and you're building it, as Loie said before, not in a vacuum, but based on evidence. I'm going to turn to the next slide now. We've had some questions in the workshops on Tuesday and Wednesday about how do I know how much help I can get from somebody else in the revising stage of my writing, or even, let's say, in the planning stage of my writing. Whether I'm working with a writing tutor or a member of my family or a friend or anybody else, how do I know how much help they can give me on an assignment? U of M has this great one-page handout posted on the website. If you search on the U of M website, just search for appropriate collaboration guidelines for written assignments. You'll come straight to this one-page handout, which gives us guidelines for having others help us on our papers, no matter who they are. And Loie, do you want to say some things about this handout or about how much collaboration can there be?
Yes, for sure. So this is a question that I get all the time when I'm giving presentations and talking with students about the expectations for completing your academic work. If you have completed U of M Essentials, you will have learned a little bit about inappropriate collaboration, which is a form of academic misconduct at the university. And it's defined as when a student works with another person, whether it's a student or not a student, on an assignment that's meant to be individual. So something that is really surprising to a lot of students that comes to U of M is that the assignments that you receive at the university tend to be individual assignments unless your instructor explicitly tells you that you can collaborate with others on the assignment. So, for something like a paper is typically an individual assignment, not always, but most of the time, a test or a take-home exam is an individual assessment, that kind of thing. So this definition can scare some students and make them think, well, I'm really not confident with my writing. How am I going to get any better if I can't work with anybody else, if no one else can see my writing? So what's really important to note is that getting feedback on your writing is just a natural part of the writing process, and it's an important part because it helps you to sort of see the patterns in your writing, get another perspective on it. But where it can be problematic is when someone works in your writing. They might directly edit or revise pieces of your writing, so you don't actually learn how to improve it. You just have that sort of somebody else's approach to your writing directly integrated in there, and then it can't be properly evaluated by your instructor. So these guidelines were created to help students understand what kinds of collaboration are appropriate for written assignments. So it really breaks it down into, you can think about receiving formal versus informal tutoring. So formal tutoring, somebody who's in a tutor role, so like a writing tutor. An informal tutor might be somebody like a parent or a significant other or a sibling, someone who might give you feedback on your writing. And both can be valuable. But what's important to note is that someone who is trained by the University of Manitoba knows how to give you that feedback in a way that is appropriate, that will help you to improve your writing and won't be considered inappropriate assistance. So any of the supports and services and resources through the Academic Learning Center are all appropriate forms of getting feedback on your written assignment. Where it can be problematic is working with somebody like a private tutor who's not affiliated with the university, or having somebody like a family member directly go into your paper and change things. they might have the best of intentions, but they don't have specific training in how to appropriately provide that feedback to you. So this handout can be really helpful for you if you're
Great, thank you, Loie. I think that's a great transition over to you, Natalie, to talk about the Writing Tutor Service with the Academic Learning Center.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I will now walk you through some of the services that the Academic Learning Center offers students, as well as how to book an appointment with a writing tutor so you can get that early feedback on your writing. So at the Academic Learning Center, our mission is to support undergraduate students and graduate students at the U of M in the development of their skills in writing and studying and researching. So because of that, our services include one-to-one tutoring in writing, study skills, and content for select courses. And our services also include supplemental instruction for select courses, online support from an EAL specialist, and then tip sheets and writing and on writing and study skills. So although today we're going to focus a little bit more on accessing the Academic Learning Center's writing tutor service, feel free to check out the Academic Learning Center's website for more information on other services that are listed on this slide, and that'll be linked in a slide coming up. Okay. So who are the Academic Learning Center writing tutors? Well, first, Academic Learning Center writing tutors are upper-level students from a wide variety of academic backgrounds. We're experienced writers who are trained in providing feedback on student writing, like Loie said, but we're also neutral peers. So that means that we're not here to evaluate your work, but rather to support you wherever you're at in the writing process. So overall, tutors connect with students to build scaffolds into the writing process so that writers can see where they want to go next. So the most important thing that we can do is contribute to your motivation to keep on working on your writing. So now that you know a little bit more about us as writing tutors and about the ALC in general, let's talk about how to make an appointment with a tutor. So first, you'll need to navigate to our webpage. This slide gives you a screenshot of the Academic Learning Center's webpage along with the web address. And on our webpage, to make an appointment with a tutor, just click Make an Appointment with a Tutor. That'll take you to the login page for the Academic Learning Center's online booking system. If this is your first time using the system, you will need to register for an account, and to do that, just click Register for an Account. So clicking on Register for an Account will take you to a registration window. Remember to use your U of M student email address here on this form, because the system will only create an account for you if you input your U of M email address here. This email address is also the means through which we'll communicate with you and send you feedback. So very important to use that U of M student email address. Once you've created an account, you can log into the Academic Learning Center's online booking system. By default, you'll be taken to our main schedule, the undergraduate student writing schedule. To book an appointment, you'll want to find an open appointment. These are the white boxes, and then you'll click on it. This will open up an appointment window with a form for you to fill out. Fill out that form, and then click Create Appointment to finish booking your appointment. Once booked, your appointment will show up in gold on the schedule. This makes it really easy to identify once you return to the schedule. Note that you can always go back and change, cancel, or upload a new document for that appointment by clicking on it. If you have any questions or any trouble while booking an appointment, please feel free to contact the Academic Learning Center at our email address, which is academic_learning@umanitoba.ca. We look forward to hearing from you and working with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie, for running through that with us again. And one last thing, Natalie, could you stop the recording now?